Welcome to the Politics of Everything. I'm Amber Daines, your host and podcast producer. This is a half hour of power, a podcast dropping every week where I unpack the politics of everything, from money to motherhood, nutrition to narcissism, startups to secularism, the environment, quality, and much, much more. Our guests are seasoned in the field or topic of their choice, even if you've not heard of them yet. This is a non-partisan show. So while I love exploring varied views and get a buzz from a healthy debate of ideas, this is not a purely blue, white, green program. Please subscribe, tune in and enjoy the politics of everything. Tim Burrowes and I have had similar career paths in some ways. We both started our media careers in newspapers, magazines and online some 3 decades ago, when he founded his award-winning Mumbrella business the same year I started my first PR consultancy. I recall how innovative the website was in its offering. Tim has seized the opportunity to disrupt the media industry's 2 traditional print titles with an analytically led digital-only product. Under his editorship, Mumbrella was twice named Website of the Year at the Publishers Australia Awards, while he was named Business Journalist of the Year. He was also twice named Editor of the Year at the British Society of Magazine Editors Awards. He expanded this to a business model driven by running conferences and awards, including launching the icon event Mumbrella 360, in which, pre-COVID, more than 3,000 marketers and media executives would gather across 3 days at the biggest event of its type in Asia. While Tim was curator, Mumbrella 360 was twice named Conference of the Year at the Australian Event Awards. In the decades since its launch, Mumbrella earned its stripes as a respected authority on the Australian media and marketing landscape, with Tim becoming a recognised commentator on media issues. In 2017, Mumbrella was sold to the US-owned Diversified Communications in a multi-million-dollar deal. Prior to Mumbrella, Tim edited the Aussie ad industry Bible B&T Weekly, and before coming to Australia, Tim was the Dubai-based launch editor of Campaign magazine, covering advertising and marketing stories throughout the Middle East. And before that, he was editor of Media Week in the UK. He began his career on locally and daily newspapers before his first editorship on specialist B2B magazine Hospital Doctor. Tim has a new project as author of a book, Media Unmade, the definitive story of Australia's media during the disruptive decade of 2010 to 2020, and it comes out in July this year. And today we are discussing the politics of unmade. Welcome, Tim.
Hey, Amber, thank you very much for the invitation to join you.
So I want to see if the similarities continue between you and I. Did you always want to be a journalist, and how did you get that first break?
Look, I suppose I did, or if not a journalist, I was certainly fascinated by the media generally. So I was quite lucky, you know, as you say, sort of my early parts of my career in the UK. And I was very lucky to stumble into a local newspaper when I was 18. So I didn't go to university first. I was lucky enough to get my kind of training on the job, and then to be for the more formal parts to be sent along by my employer, which is probably something that doesn't happen now. So
no, probably last of an era, really. I think that happened because I imagine we're similar ages, and I definitely did the uni course because I was kind of told, oh, you won't get in anymore if you don't do that. And then you do the cadetship where you earn like $2 an hour, and, you know, all the things that you think you're going to do, you don't do yet.
Well, I've recently realised that in Australia, the way of telling somebody's age when they're around my age is whether they're eligible to get the AstraZeneca jab or not. So,
right. So no, I'm in a Pfizer boat still. So I'm probably going to get it in about a year's time at this rate.
Well, I'm a couple of years ahead of you then in that case.
So what made you start Mumbrella in 2008? And I guess once you sort of had that seed idea and then launched it and got stuck into it, was the reality different to what you really expected it would be to run your own media business and platform?
Yeah, look, a couple of things, I suppose. First of all, the idea that we had when we started Mumbrella was slightly different to where we ended up. So, you know, at the time, as you said, I was working at B&T, which was, although it did do a daily newsletter, it was very much had the sense of coming out once a day, you know, as a sort of companion to the weekly magazine. And I suppose I initially thought that the opportunity was actually more in even more specialized niches. So, you know, we thought that we would do a series of, you know, I mean, it sounds like a terrible idea now, and actually was a terrible idea. As
Oh, I
soon
love
as
to hear people's terrible ideas because I often they lead to the good ideas as well.
Yeah, well, we were thinking weekly PDFs for specialist parts of the industry. So a PDF for people working in media agencies, the same for people in creative agencies and PR agencies and marketers and so on. And then the kind of adjunct to that was, okay, and we'll need some sort of, receptacle just for SEO reasons. So we threw together, a quick WordPress website to kind of capture everything, and that was Mumbrella. So luckily, because by the time we launched, it was kind of December, we decided, okay, well, we won't launch the PDF straight away, but we'll launch Mumbrella, glorified blog, so it was WordPress, it was basic, one stream of content. And luckily, that part of the business model took off. So, very fortunately, we never did the terrible PDF idea.
Oh, excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear that you had the bad idea before the good ideas came. I guess, you've been in the industry for a long time, and do you still have a love of journalism and media as much as these days, or do you feel a bit jaded and kind of like, I guess, over it in any way at all? Because you obviously don't do the day-to-day for Mumbrella anymore, but, you're obviously still involved as a commentator and obviously with the book that's coming out.
Look, it's a fascinating industry to cover, particularly, and I suppose it's almost, in terms of what I write about, sort of straddles two worlds, that sort of world of the, the business of media, and then the world of the business of marketing. And obviously the two intersect quite a lot, but the characters are different and the money dynamics are different. And, I guess there's always something fascinating going on there. And I suppose the other benefit for a journalist is it reminds me a bit of my days working on local newspapers, where you're actually writing about your own world. Now, most journalists actually don't get to write about their own world. Certainly, if you're, a medical specialist, you're writing about doctors, but you're probably not a doctor yourself. Whereas at least when I write about media, I am writing about my own world. So it's always fascinating. And I suppose, for the first time in the last couple of years, I'd say also, one of the differences that we're feeling slightly more optimistic each year rather than less optimistic, certainly in terms of the kind of, the future viability of media. So having spent, most of the first 3 decades with each year seeming a tiny bit worse than the year before in terms of the outlook, suddenly actually, at least in the sort of short to medium term, it's possible to actually feel more optimistic.
Yeah, which is a good place to be. I think even as a former journalist, you have a nostalgia for the industry, and it has gone through some tough times, which probably lands us to the topic of your book. Writing a book is a big job, and it is different to being a short form journalist or a podcaster even. The experience of writing Media Unmade, do you feel like it took you a long time from initial idea to really finishing it? And what would be some of your learnings and experiences in producing this book?
Yeah, look, and I think particularly for me, one of the things about online publishing is you get so used to that dopamine hit of you publish it and it's out in the world a few moments after you've finished writing it often, versus, a book is, it's a project of certainly more than a year. So I had this sort of idea of writing about the evolution of Australia's media over the last decade. So initially it was going to be the 11-year decade of 2010 to 2020, and then it became a 12-year decade when I included 2021 as well. And then there was there was a little bit of effort of finding some sort of publishing interest, and I was very lucky that Hardy Grant, who obviously one of Australia's great independent publishers, was interested in taking it on as a project. And even then, at the sort of stage where there was a synopsis, it was quite a flat structure. Effectively, it would have been a chapter on Channel 9, a chapter on News Corp, a chapter on Google, and so on. Whereas, of course, there's a much more complicated story because all of these organizations interact with each other. So, I found once once Hardy Grant were kind enough to offer me a contract, and I was able to take some long service leave from Mumbrella, the first 2 or 3 weeks of the project were just about building a structure. It was working out what I would and wouldn't write about. Developing, on a giant corkboard and on a giant whiteboard, what effectively became, what would be more traditionally in fiction, a 3-act structure.
Mm.
And I was, I suppose, very fortunate that, I knew that the action really started in, I suppose, 2012, when there was that one terrible week when Fairfax announced 1,900 jobs were going and they were closing print works. And in that same week, News Corp announced that they were making their own changes and their own redundancies. And they didn't say the number at the time, but that was about 1,600. So, 3,500 jobs gone in a single week from the media industry. Never been a week like it. And that was my opening. But at the time I actually started writing the book, I didn't know that I would get the closing of the ACCC leaning on Google and Facebook through the news media bargaining code and effectively persuading them to hand over tens of millions of dollars to Australia's publishers over the next 3 to 5 years, and effectively, in an incredibly grubby way, but nonetheless effectively safeguarding the near-term future of the funding of journalism.
Total plot twist.
Absolutely, yes. The chapter I've actually called a Deus. My Latin might be terrible pronunciation, but Deus ex machina. That sort of act of God that gives you the plot twist you weren't expecting for your ending.
Well done. Very, very serendipitous. Well timed. The term unmade is something a lot of us might not be familiar with it, and it is an unusual kind of term. What does it mean, and is it actually a negative slant on this disruption that we have seen in traditional and other media outlets over the last 10 years?
Yeah, two probably sort of thoughts around that. One is sort of, the unmaking is what comes before the remaking. And that's absolutely what we've seen with the media in Australia over the last decade, particularly the sort of, the business structure of it all. We've seen ourselves go through this transition from a media which very broadly is primarily funded through advertising to a media whose future is going to be funded much more through users, readers, audience paying directly, whether that's streaming content, like your Netflixes or your Stans, etc., or through newspaper subscriptions. That and that has its positives and negatives. The major negative being the thing that seems to work for driving subscriptions to, the likes of Sky News in Australia or Fox News in the US or many newspapers, is some form of polarization, giving a niche audience what they want. So I guess that unmaking and remaking is part of it. And then the other one is, I suppose, is a slightly more practical reason for just choosing a word in the title, which is slightly unfamiliar. Is one of the lessons I had when we started Mumbrella was owning an unfamiliar word really gives you a bit of an advantage online just for things like SEO. Now, it did mean that for the first couple of years, every single phone message I'd leave, it would be, like umbrella, but with an M in front.
Hey, you thought about this.
Yeah, so similarly, I guess I was looking for something, a word I could own again that not too many other people would use. Clearly there are other people who've used the phrase unmade before me. Whereas I think with Mumbrella, at the time, there was a cartoon on the web of a kind of mum sheltering her baby as a mumbrella, and
there you go.
And then there was some. It was, and then there was some sort of trademark BMW had taken against some sort of part and some medical company in the UK, but that was basically it around the world. So definitely finding a word that you can be quite closely associated with seemed like, if not essential, then a good idea if it was possible.
And do you think that we have had a similar media story to other countries like the US or the UK even, or, parts of Asia? Or is our Australian media story, unique and in some ways, a perfect storm for what happened?
Yeah, look, it's clearly, we've each taken our own path, I suppose, in each country. So for Australia, we had the moguls, we had the Kerry Packer sort of, founding sort of, I guess, founding energy for Channel 9, and then what was then ACP magazines and became Bauer Media, and more recently R Media. You had Kerry Stokes, who owns, the West newspaper, and also, of course, Seven West Media, Channel 7. So and then you've had various companies have their hands and let go of Channel 10, including, Rupert Murdoch and the Murdoch family. So you've got these actions of individuals, and definitely one of the things I've realized kind of, in writing Media Unmade is that actions of individuals actually made a difference. The calls that CEOs made changed the outcome. So none of this was inevitable. But here in Australia, you've also got the unstoppable force coming in of the digital behemoths. So we talk about the digital duopoly of Google and Facebook, but also you've got, the rising might of Apple and Amazon as well. So they're finding their own way, and really kind of, I guess, carving a swathe into Australia. And, maybe Amazon hasn't fully made itself felt, but, I'm certain that it absolutely will. So, you have got those two stories, but, I suspect that in every country, there's a unique mix and a unique story as well. So, that, I think it's a bit of both, but you can't ignore things like, the implications of the rise of the QAnon conspiracy theories and the storming of the Capitol, kind of driven by Facebook conspiracy, driven by Twitter, driven by, the ability of Donald Trump to weaponize all of that. One of the lessons for me from the start of this year was there's nothing to say that couldn't happen in Australia. It's we've got more in common than we have in differences with the US. So there are huge lessons to be drawn from other markets of the influence of social media and what can happen to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, thinking about Unmade, and you did allude to it before, the idea that that same media or a reincarnation of that can be remade. Is that actually possible now? Like, because we're so in love with our Facebook, our Google, our Stan, our, I guess our content on demand. What could that look like to sort of, I guess, resuscitate some of the media in a new and fabulous way that perhaps has not been realised yet?
I suppose one of the things is it always feels as if where we are at the time feels quite permanent, and as if that's the way things are going to be. And yet, whenever you look back at a previous 5 years or a previous 10 years, that's not the case. So, a decade ago, or perhaps just fractionally over a decade ago, it looked like MySpace was going to be the big player.
Oh, good old
Facebook
MySpace.
was up and, yeah, exactly.
I reckon that gets used as a case study at least once a week in a conversation with someone of, what could happen and what could have been and should have been in some ways for businesses.
It is. And of course, that's one of those big what ifs, because remember, News Corp bought MySpace. So what if News Corp had made a go of MySpace as the main social media player as well? Would the organization have been as dominant in that social media world as they are in the world of newspapers, for instance? So definitely everything can and does get remade, and it feels that yeah, I guess commercially Google are preeminent. In terms of kind of impact on society, Facebook, but it also does feel like there is some sort of reaction or backlash of some form. So I suspect that people will move on. It might happen through kind of antitrust investigations in the US. We might well see that some of these organizations are broken up. Why, in the long term, will the regulators allow, the Google or parent company of Google is Alphabet? Why would Alphabet be allowed to carry on owning Google, the search engine, and to own all of the plumbing, or the vast majority of the plumbing of the advertising ecosystem, and also you kind of the predominant video player in YouTube, and you'll get the same with Facebook, which owns WhatsApp and which owns Instagram. So I think there will be a moment when we see a breakup. It'll probably be driven out of the US first of all, or possibly Europe. But again, that's what history tells us. It happens with the oil barons. It happened with the telephone companies in the US. So I think that moment will come, and that perhaps is what will start the next kind of the next round of the revolution, if we want to call it that.
Absolutely. Look, your book account says that against the existential threat embodied by Google and Facebook, Australia's media companies remade their broken business models and plotted takeovers in a battle for survival. And just when the worst seemed to be over, COVID-19 delivered the biggest advertising recession of all time, pushing every media company to the brink. And obviously with it, some of the best known dynastic companies that we are very familiar with. Was there any other way that it could have been done better and stayed afloat? Obviously, we didn't see the pandemic coming, but the tide of change was coming for a long time. So I'm always curious to know the people in the driver's seats, how could they not see that we're in the Titanic and we're going to hit this iceberg at some point?
Look, I suppose that is one of the questions. It's a lot easier a year and a bit on to look back and say, why didn't we know this? Why didn't we know that? On the political level, there are lots of arguments about why don't these various organisations, why shouldn't they be made to pay back JobKeeper when they came through profitable? And of course, at the time, we didn't know that was going to be the case. And I suppose, you could look at, for instance, outdoor advertising companies or cinema advertising companies, when you're talking about media or magazines or newspapers, all very vulnerable to some sort of disruption in consumer habits. But also, even when there's a vulnerability, what do you do about it? What do you do about it when particularly you have a business model that works well? And time again, that's been the issue. When you have a business model that works well right now, it's really hard to disrupt yourself. I think that's the pain we're seeing. Foxtel, which is,
Oh, yes.
you, as you know, sort of owned by both News Corp and then a minority stake from Telstra. And of course, has been very profitable for many years, but seeing all this disruption from the streaming services, and it certainly initially really struggled to respond to that and lost a lot of ground. Finally, now I think responding with its own streaming services, but it took a long time and had several false starts first. And I think that is the problem of the incumbent, isn't it? It's always harder to disrupt yourself.
Yeah, it takes a lot of guts to be able to do that, especially when you are still making money and things seem to be going well. So what other industries do you think are being unmade as we look, the lessons of the media must relate to other sectors? And I think of things like energy and renewables, tech, even small business manufacturing, which got into the spotlight during COVID because suddenly, you had vodka businesses that could suddenly make hand sanitizer and pivot very quickly to meet demand. Are there other sectors that you can see this idea happening, and sort of what's some observations that you have around that?
Oh, look, there are so many. As you said at the start, I was lucky enough to be part of a kind of financial exit from Mumbrella a few years back. So in a very small way, I get to make a few investments now. So there's an awful lot going on in the renewables sector. So I've got a small investment there.
We're getting stock tips from Tim Burrowes, everyone. Let's go.
Well, I won't name the individual companies so much as the sectors. And education is another one. That's definitely being disrupted. The world of finance, of course, something which feels massively disruptable, and I've not yet spotted what that opportunity is the real estate industry. It's so old fashioned. It's so ingrained. It's so really anti-consumer. It's all stacked to the benefit of the real estate agents who don't have to be particularly clever or intelligent to do their jobs.
Not during a boom, particularly. It's like money for jam, really.
Yeah, look, it absolutely is. And, it seems there's something unique in Australia's psyche about the sort of obsession with real estate as well. Always goes up, never goes down. So that feels like a sector massively ready to be disrupted. And I think the question is, how will that happen? But I'm certain that it will.
Absolutely. I always believe people haven't got to where they are with their success stories without at least one or two great mentors. Are there any that stand out for you, and what have they taught you about success and life?
Yeah, look, lots, and at different stages in the career. I think, most recently, we were very fortunate with kind of the business of Mumbrella, and it was myself and colleague Martin Lane was a co-owner, and Ian Wakeling was another co-owner, and we were very lucky that we were able to tap into the kind of the big brain of Tony Fore, who sort of came on board and would advise us on sort of the equivalent of a day a week, and he was the person who really turned us from something that had an audience and some sort of business model into a much more professionalized operation. He'd sort of had a big background in the world of 9MSN and that sort of thing, and is currently the chairman of O Media. So the couple of years or so that Tony spent with us changed how we ran the business an awful lot. And then I suppose I look back much earlier in my career, there was that thing when I was a deputy editor, the editor at the time I learned a lot from. When I was a junior reporter, it would be your the chief reporter and the news editor you learn so much from, and sort of 20, 25 years on, you think of some of those lessons that you learn. And I suspect that might be one of the things of, being a mentor is I suspect the mentor forgets what they said a lot sooner than the mentee does.
Absolutely. I think that's correct. And those things can stick with you for a long time if they've had some impact. Okay, a bit of fun now. If you had to choose a favourite book, song or film, what would it be and why?
That's not too hard, really, if I'm honest. I'm somewhat obsessional about Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, so as it happens, this is audio, so we can't see, but I'm sitting here wearing my Springsteen on Broadway hoodie. So yeah, Bruce Springsteen, Born to Run would be the one that would come to mind every time.
Awesome. Great choice. Finally, as we wrap up, what would be your top piece of advice for anyone wanting to navigate the politics of unmade?
Yeah, and it's funny because you were kind enough to give me a bit of warning of the questions, and every single question I thought, okay, I think I know an answer to that one, and then that was the one question where I just thought I don't have a great answer for that one. I honestly don't, and I suspect one of the reasons is that whenever people try and make any sort of prediction for the future, it never comes true, and when you try to give advice generally, it becomes so specific. So look, I must admit this is one I don't think I have anything great. The thing that worked for me was finding something interesting to do and trying to do it as well as I could. But that sounds so trite because I was so lucky, and everybody has privilege along the way to put them in that position. So that's what worked for me, but that wouldn't work for everybody else necessarily. So if you can, absolutely do something that you feel passionate about, but at the same time I'm horrendously aware that's horrifically trite advice.
Well, you've been very generous with your time, and I am looking forward to reading your book when it's in my hot little hands very soon. If you do want to connect further with Tim, there will be some details on our show notes. Until next time, keep well. Thanks so much for listening today. If you've enjoyed the politics of everything, I thrive on your feedback. So please add a short review and share the podcast with your network through Apple, Spotify, and all the usual suspects. I'm always on the hunt for new and diverse guests, so if you or someone you know has a fresh idea you're busting to get out there, please email me at amber@amberdanes.com and my crew will get back to you very soon.